I'm going to get started
Mhm.
here. And I really want to welcome everyone. And those of you who don't know me, my name is Theo Spanos Dunphy, and I'm the president and executive director of Global Citizen Circle. For those of you who don't know, Global Citizen Circle is approaching its 52nd year next month, and we've been bringing together diverse groups of people to engage in dialogue on critical issues, both local and global, for 52 years. And it's always been our belief that positive change must begin with open and respectful conversation. And that's what we've committed ourselves to for over half a century. I don't know about you, but I'm finding myself needing more than ever to talk with folks about what's happening in the world and what we can do to make it better. So I'm incredibly heartened to see so many of you from across the globe here today for this program. We need it. We need to talk. I believe I counted 14 or 15 countries represented in the registrations to this event, and at least 19 states, probably more. Something else I want to mention about Global Citizen Circle before we move into the program is that we've always valued intergenerational dialogue, and I want to thank our assistant director, Phoebe Delarabidi, for spearheading an initiative to co-create with young people the kind of exchanges that benefit young and old alike, but that also strengthen and uplift the leadership capacity of a new generation. I'm really happy to see that there's a number of our emerging leaders here with us today, and you are always welcome here. As a small organization with a global reach, we're fortunate to have great people who volunteer as directors and global advisors to help us put programs together. But for us to continue to provide this kind of free programming, outreach, emerging leader, and peace initiatives, we need your financial help. So if you feel you're in a position to help, the link, Phoebe will put the link if it's not already there to donate in the chat. There, I've done my job, my plug for fundraising, not something I love doing, but something that's so necessary for nonprofits. Now I'll turn to our moderator for today's program, Brian Wright O'Connor. Brian's a longtime friend of the Circle, and we're grateful for his participation in this and many other Circle programs over the years. I won't spend time telling you all about his accomplishments, which are many, and you can read his bio in the digital participants list that was sent to you with the calendar link. But I just want to tell you a little story about what brought him to this particular circle because it's emblematic of the way our circles often come together. A few weeks ago, what seems like much longer now, the US military went into Venezuela and removed its president and his wife. You know that story, right? Well, as is often the case with Global Citizen Circle, we felt we needed to address this in some way. And I happened to be on social media and saw a comment that Brian made about Venezuela. I instantly thought, oh, Brian can help us think about a circle, given his experience dealing with Venezuela while he was working with Joe Kennedy II at Citizens Energy, which was buying crude oil from Venezuela, refining it and selling it, and then sending heating oil to needy households in the US who were having trouble keeping up with the costs of staying warm. So I contacted Brian to meet and brainstorm ideas, which he agreed to do without hesitation. And as our communications continued with Brian over the course of a week after the Venezuelan incursion, we realized that the issue was so much broader and that we really wanted to address US power globally. So here we are today with Brian facilitating a conversation with two experienced US thinkers and diplomats, and following their opening discussion, we'll open up the conversation to you. And I know there are many of you who could, from your own lived experience, comment or ask a question. When we get to that point, Brian will call on you to unmute yourself and share directly with everyone your comment or question. But at any time during the circle, if you have a question, a comment, or even a resource that you want to share with everyone, please add it to the chat. So let's get into it. I'm going to turn the mic over to Brian to get us started. Are you there, Brian? Oh, Brian, you're muted.
Brian, you're muted.
No,
There you
I,
go.
okay. Sorry. I've been involved with the Circle for 40 years, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Uh, the My experience in Venezuela led me here, but my great friendship with the Dunphy family is the real reason I'm here. So happy to be a part of this. You know, it's interesting that we're meeting in the 250th anniversary of what you might call a right makes might mission of a revolution when force was used as a final option to secure freedom and begin the unfinished experiment of American democracy. You know, we have a lot of, we're going to have a very robust discussion about the proper and improper use of force. And I think it's important to think of our own origins as a country in one that followed actually a very lawful path and attempts to resolve peaceably conflict with the English crown. You know, we're just a few weeks removed from the U.S. Special Forces mission that whisked away President Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela and triggered control by the U.S. of the nation's oil. We're not sure how it's going to play out, but it was a sort of a unique exercise in control of another nation through a very focused mission of special forces. And as we speak, a carrier group is assembling in the seas off Iran, signaling another possible projection of U.S. power against the Islamic State. Meanwhile, we see military style force used on American streets, which is a whole nother discussion, but not entirely unrelated to the moral use of power and might makes right in our own shores. So all this is taking place with a long history behind us that I'm sure we've all been thinking about, the lessons of Vietnam, Panama, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, many, many hot spots, just to name a few. So does might make right the moral cost of power is a question that weighs heavily on us all now. Not only the cost of action, but the cost of inaction, where proper use of force might have resulted in more positive consequences for people in crisis. So we're honored to be joined as discussion leaders today by two distinguished diplomats and scholars who have both served on the razor's edge of war and peace. They know the stakes, they have lived them, and they know the consequences of action and inaction because they've seen them and participated in them. Karin von Hippel, our first discussion leader, served in the U.S. State Department in senior counterterrorism and conflict stabilization operations. She directed post-conflict reconstruction projects for global nonprofits, as well as the UN in Somalia and Kosovo. She is the author of Democracy by Force, U.S. Military Intervention in the post-Cold War world. Karin also served as Director General of the highly regarded think tank, the Royal United Services Institute in London, for 9 years. And she joins us from her home in sunny London. Ambassador Rick Barton, who's been pretty much everywhere, was born into a foreign service family. So he comes to diplomacy through genetics. He served as the founding Secretary of State for Conflict and Stabilization and Operations in Washington and roles around the world. He has led peace building initiatives in over 40 crisis zones across the globe. He's a highly published author and a lecturer at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. We couldn't hope to have discussion leaders better versed in the contemplation as well as the exercise of both soft and hard power in the United States. And that's what we're focusing on today. So as an opening question, I'll address Karin first. But following the recent removal of President Maduro from Venezuela and the now shelved threats to take Greenland by force, And the looming possibility, since we first discussed this topic of conflict with Iran, has the US reached a new level of projection of force around the world? Are we in it like we've
Aha.
never been in it before? It certainly could be an unprecedented inflection point. And what do you see as the moral consequences of U.S. action around the globe? Not only the use of force, but the threat of force. So, Karin, why don't you open the discussion with your response?
Really easy question. Thank you, Brian. Thank you also to Theo and Phoebe and other circle members for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, especially with Rick. He's my former boss. He's my former co-director and my friend. And you may or may not know this, but both of us worked for part of the State Department that's now been doged out of existence. So we have the battle scars as well. I'm sitting in London, as you mentioned, Brian, and really trying to help interpret what's going on in the United States over here because you have a lot of very confused people, a lot of close allies of the United States who are just deeply upset by what's going on. I get deeply upset by what's going on often too. I often have to just stop listening to the news. But I'm a positive person and I try to look at things in a positive way. And I do think, without necessarily addressing your very excellent question, that US is, well, globally, we're going through a change. We're shifting from this post-World War II order to something new. We're not there yet, so we don't know what it's going to look like. But if we want to look at some of the positive things that Trump has done in terms of really forcing US allies to think in a much more profound way about their own resilience, their own security, and their own defense. And I think everyone got a bit complacent over the decades. And so I think in the long run, all of this stress and chaos and anxiety that's being caused is going to be for the better, and probably for the better for the United States as well, because I think the US will treat its allies in a different way if it's on par with its allies, as opposed to dictating, which is what we all saw when we worked in the US government. So I think over the long term, it's a good thing. But, we can go into the ins and outs of each of these. In my view, there's no real consistency with what he's doing. He's just, doing things off the cuff. There's lots of people trying to interpret and read the tea leaves. And I'm not sure there's a grand theory behind what's going on beyond using force, trying to make some money, occasionally seemingly concerned about what's going on in some parts of the world, and occasionally, like with Ukraine or in the Middle East, trying to stop war, and doing things, though, that no one else has been able to do. And that's what I find interesting and a little bit depressing. Like, why couldn't previous US administrations, why couldn't the Biden administration have brought the end, or at least a ceasefire to Gaza, right? Trump managed to do that. He did it with the Biden team before he came into office. Why is it that Donald Trump was able to change the conversation from what kind of weapons we should supply to Ukraine to talking about a ceasefire in Ukraine? Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to end up with where we want to end up, and there are a lot of very good concerns about what might happen. And is he going to give Russia everything it wants? But he did manage to change the conversation, and that hadn't happened before. So I think I'll just stop there. I don't want to go on too long. These are big, big questions. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Rick as well.
Well, thank you, Brian. Do you want me to just jump in?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, first off, I'm just delighted to be here with the Duffys. I mean, their constructive contributions to global peace and to community building are legendary, and I've always loved being associated with them. So this is a real pleasure, and all their friends. So thanks, Theo. Thanks, Phoebe. And Karen's kind words about friendship. She is one of my oldest friends. So, um, yeah, not by age. So anyway, it's a real pleasure. I do think it's fair to say this is an inflection point. We're constantly at inflection points in American. It's maybe one of the less promising ones, because even though Karin cited, I think some openings and some opportunities, the confidence that I have in what I consider a whatever presidency. I mean, he sort of took us from forever wars to whatever wars, and but there's a whatever quality about it, virtually every day. So the upset and the confusion that we're seeing globally is definitely shared domestically, and but I think it's fair and wise of Karin to suggest that there's some of the things, some of the initiatives, issues that needed to be long addressed, like military bases in so many countries. I mean, we have something like 750 bases around the world right now. Mike Mansfield, who I have had a great respect for when he was the Democratic Majority Leader, wondered why we were in so many countries decades ago. And again, there's kind of an inertia to American policy and a conventional wisdom quality that I think we have to break through. So that's the opening, but we have a highly erratic one-person policy that has not really picked the places. I mean, why would you offend allies? Why would you even bring up Greenland? I mean, there's just such a happenstance and no follow through when on the Venezuela attack when he was asked, well, who's going to be in charge of this policy now that we've had this successful mission? He turned around and surprised Rubio, Hegseth, and the head of the Joint Chiefs completely by saying it's these three great leaders behind me. They had never heard that before. They didn't have a clue. That is not unusual in U.S. foreign policy, but the reason that bureaus like the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, the reason AID existed, the reason USIP, and which the Duffys had a lot to do with getting going, were realities of our lives, is that you would have some human capacity and some way of actually thinking about these things, not just after they had happened, but maybe when you're spending 2 months preparing a military mission and going to throw almost $1 billion probably at it, you would possibly spend 10 or 15 million dollars on imagining what might follow afterwards. That is a shortcoming that we've had for decades, but it's more so in the here and now. So it is there's the erraticism that I talked about has made it a moral vacuum as well. Our morality is always in doubt, and the world always, I mean, the world tries to invest in our morality, and then we kind of we spend it down in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. I mean, three adventures that our country would have been much, much, much better without, I believe. So I think that's probably going to be true of several of the initiatives of Trump as well. So we have to be very much more selective, much more prepared, and then our moral standing will be what we I think hope it should be. I've got a wonderful JFK quote that maybe I can get out of this piece with that. Apparently, in his inaugural in 1961, Kennedy said he imagined a new world of law where the strong are just and the weak are secure and the peace preserved. Well, we've been adrift, and now we're lost, and it's going to take quite a while.
Thank you, Rick. Well, let's that's a great overview from both of you about the current drift or driftlessness of the administration. Let's look at what brought us here together for a moment and get your views. Venezuela, that was a surgical strike, surgical use of U.S. power by special forces. It's had an enormous impact on the country already. Some would say for the better. What do you say?
You want me to go first, Karin?
Yes, sure. I'm sorry, Rick. Yes.
Well, I'm not going to spend a second defending Maduro. So that result, I think, is going to be wildly globally popular, and certainly among many Venezuelans, most Venezuelans. So that part of it. But again, we have these international I do believe that the international standards are helpful. I really believe in the UN Charter. I am not a huge fan of sovereignty. I think it's like patriotism. It is used as the last refuge of many scoundrels. Uh, but nevertheless, there are innumerable ways that we could have probably tightened the screws on them beyond what we had done. But change did not happen, and elections had failed. But again, since I really work on what do you do to avoid conflict, and how do you get out of it faster, and how do you rebuild from it, I don't see any of those pieces in place, and I don't think that we've really thought it through. And I think we're trying to turn somebody who's very hostile to the United States into a subservient leader, which will obviously undermine her own standing in the country, mainly by continuing to threaten her physically. I mean, I think that's what we hold over her. And so I don't know that we have the attention that this president has the attention span. I think he may be actually trying to get at Cuba. I mean, there's just a lot of things that leave me deeply uncomfortable, that the much harder work, because taking on a second-rate military with the U.S. Special Forces that prepared for the mission for several months, that's not a big job. I mean, that was not that heroic. So now either have to buy off the existing administration, or keep threatening them. I don't know. It makes me very uncomfortable.
Karin, you've worked
Can, yeah,
in
can I
both,
just say quickly on
of course.
Oh no, go ahead. Well, on Venezuela, I just want to say that I mean, totally agree with everything Rick said. The only thing, if here I am again trying to be the Pollyannish about this, the other thing positive I could say is it was smart that they didn't remove the entire uh, uh, government from power, because we would have seen looting and chaos and power vacuum like we saw in Panama in 1989, as you know, Brian, like we saw in Kosovo, like we saw in Iraq. But like Rick just said, we have no idea if there's a plan. Now, I think they knew that it was smart not to pull everybody out, but if we all thought, oh, okay, they didn't pull everybody out because they're going to sequence it, maybe he would get a lot more support, but we just don't know. There is never a plan about anything that he does. And I think it's because he doesn't always know what he is going to do, and he doesn't want to restrict himself. And I don't even think he would follow it if he did have a plan. But it makes it very difficult for countries around the world to get involved with anything, or because nobody ever knows what's about to happen. And I don't think unpredictability is good for international politics. It's also not good for international economics as well.
Karen and I used to use the Montreal police strike, where the Montreal police went on strike for about a night, and the city was looted all over the place. Well, I think that might have happened in Venezuela, so I agree with her. But I do think the levers that we continue to hold, mainly military, and and the promise of oil revenues, and probably buying some people off, those are all questionable.
So, Karin, you worked in counterterrorism, and Rick, you have gone into hotspots that were impacted by U.S. force at times. Let me ask you both to answer the question of what are examples of where might did precede right in the use of U.S. force, in your opinion? Karin, we'll start with you.
So there are examples, of course. We can start with Germany and Japan after the Second World War, countries that, emerged democratically. South Korea, the US was very involved in nation building after the Korean Armistice in 1953, I think. I think the Balkans generally have been positive. I worked in Kosovo for a year as part of the UN mission.
So the strikes, the airstrikes in Kosovo, you would say were proper use of power?
Well, not just the airstrikes, but the aftermath. So there's two components, and usually the military piece, just like in Iraq, goes well because we have an amazing military. But it's the aftermath that Rick was referring to earlier that really matters. And actually, in Kosovo, even though it didn't have UN Security Council approval, it was a UN-led mission partnered with NATO. And actually, it was chaotic. There were a lot of problems with it. I don't think we have time to go into them now, but overall, Kosovo ended up in a much better place. And I would say Bosnia, overall, they're not huge successes, but they're certainly better than Iraq, than Afghanistan, and many of the things that have come after it. At the end, I'd be very happy to talk a little bit about my counter-ISIL experience, because I actually think this will go to something that Rick and I both feel very passionately about with putting locals in the lead. But that's just a reminder, Brian, to come back to me about the counter-ISIL at the end, please. Okay.
Okay. We're moving along pretty quickly here. I want to broaden the discussion a little bit, bring in some others. I know the Dunphys abhor nepotism, but in spite of that, I'm going to call on a special forces veteran of 38 years, who happens to be my brother, Brendan O'Connor, who served in a number of continents, including the conflict in the Middle East, Afghanistan, South America, Central America, to talk a little bit about his view on and perspective from someone who served as boots on the ground in combat, as the sort of embodiment of the use of force, and how that and what he thinks is the proper and improper use of force, the moral use of force of our military in places abroad. You're Brendan, you're on mute. There you go.
Thank you for having me, Brother Brian. Well, let me just say there is no moral use of war. It is the breakdown of morality. That being said, oh, and by the way, my feed shows that I'm talking from UMass Boston. These are my own personal opinions. They in no way represent UMass Boston.
By the way, I should say that Brendan is the director of the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and Social Consequences at University of Massachusetts, Boston. Thank you.
Well, all the more important that I say that my views are not representative of UMass Boston and the William Joyner Institute for the Study of War and Social Consequences at this time. Once again, there is no morality in war. It is the complete breakdown of morality. There are times when America has gone to war for good reasons. But the question I want to answer is, what is my view on where the U.S. has exercised power in the right or wrong way? And as mentioned earlier in discussions, I see that people agree that Roosevelt's politically and diplomatically astute defeat of two aggressive leaders in World War II was the correct use of power. But nobody really wins in war, and it ushered in the Cold War. Building the coalition to eject Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, that was correct. But it lit the fuse on the global war on terror, because no wars truly end. The removal of Panama's Noriega was a successful limited outcome, but it was simply a speed bump in the drug war. And by the way, since we went to Venezuela based on the drug war, in the drug war, it's my belief that the real problem is not the supply of drugs, it's the demand of drugs. So I saw the excesses of the supply chain, unspeakable crimes, and the use of innocence to convince families, farmers, out-of-work urbanites to do the work of the supply side. So here it is. It's the destruction of innocence. And I say innocence, and I mean people, and the destructions of innocence, the ideal. That is a good use and reason for the use of power. After my time in South and Central America and in Afghanistan, I was deeply morally injured to see how the innocents, people, were forced by coercion, kidnapping, use of ransom, ghastly murder to do the bidding of either the cartels or the religious zealots. So in modern war, drone and missile strikes on people digging holes in the desert to emplace IEDs or to destroy boats driven by people who are likely coerced, if not by money, then to escape mutilation or by the chance to free their daughters captive in sex slavery. And I think someone else said that just a moment ago, that first of all, there's the War Powers Act, and that which I signed in late, so I can't really say what was.
Rick had a comment, Brendan, on something you were saying.
Okay, go ahead.
Brendan, one concern that I've had for some time is that the United States has gone to war without really having a dialogue with our people. There have not been congressional votes. We never raise the taxes, so we keep saying these wars don't cost us anything. We keep coming up with hundreds of billions of dollars. So that's the second way that the citizens could normally get involved. And then it used to be that about half of American families had a member of their family somewhere in the U.S. military. Today, that's down to less than 1%. So the professionalization of our military, the lack of congressional votes, the inability to fund these things has really made these kind of technical decisions by experts oftentimes in Washington. And so we're going to end up in a lot of funny places. I had a chance this past year, my wife and I celebrated our 50th anniversary in Japan, and we went to Hiroshima. My father's obituary that he wrote 10 years before he died, and none of us read until he died. He had been in Iwo Jima, in Marine in Iwo Jima, and he had decided, during that war that the bombing of Hiroshima was okay, but he also decided with my mother that they would try to spend the rest of their life maybe building peace by working for the United States Information Agency, which was sort of the Helen Keller, the Moon Rocks, the Louis Armstrong side of the U.S., the Apple computers, whatever. So I do think that we have to re-engage our people, and we keep thinking that somebody is going to save us from these behaviors. But when Karin and I worked for the Obama administration, we were doing literally thousands of special forces missions a year because we were doing so many in Iraq and Afghanistan at that time. And she raised the question of, gee, do we really want to be the extrajudicial people all over the world? And I thought it was a timely question then, and it hasn't gotten any better.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Giovanni Cristani, who works on security and defense in the European Union, in the EU Parliament, to pose a question about the role of Europe in the United States. Giovanni, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you so much. Sorry if I connect from the cell phone, but I'm at work still. Here in Italy, it's working time, and in Brussels, sorry. And yes, I'm very much interested in this topic because here in Europe, we deal with security more and more. Somebody would say finally, because it was something you can imagine that in the European Parliament, until these legislators, so until 1 year ago, basically, there was not a committee on security and defense. So it means that basically the European Union was thought as a corp being in some ways completely far away from the idea of security. It was all in concern with market. Therefore, what I want to ask here is, what do you think, in the light of a reshaping of the political role of the United States with the new presidency in terms of security commitment and in terms of areas of interest, should be the role of the European Union within NATO, but also outside NATO? And what do you think it could be the way the EU becomes somehow more and more complementary to the work that is done by the United States, that in the last weeks has been a bit, chaotic in a way? Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation.
Do you want me to
Karin?
start?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
it's great. It's a great question, Giovanni, and I hear this quite often. I think, for me, the best approach of dealing with this very erratic U.S. administration is for we're calling, let's just call them the like-minded, for lack of a better word, those who care about international law and values, Europeans, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Kiwis, the Australians, the Canadians, countries that pretty much share the respect for international law, to come together and to try to coordinate as well as possible to look for greater efficiencies in defense spending so that everybody doesn't replicate what everybody's doing. And not necessarily to be confrontational with the United States, but just say, this is how we're doing it, and we'd love for you to join us. But if you don't, this is what we're doing going forward. And I think that's, that the Europeans certainly need to, as you said, it's been focused mostly on economic stuff, versus security, resilience, all sorts of other issues. And I think that there needs to be a fire lit under many Europeans, not all Europeans. Some Europeans, especially the Nordic Baltic 8 countries, really do feel a sense of urgency. They understand the threat, but many others in more southern countries don't fully understand it, and don't really understand, about their own security and how to bolster it. So I do think that they need to really think in very short timeframes and making changes as quickly as possible.
Unless you have something to add, Rick, I want to bring in. Okay, I want to
Go ahead. I mean,
call
the
on.
one thing I would say is I think we have something like 100 plus bases or something like that in Germany still. We have 40 bases in Italy still. I mean, these are opportunities. I'm now starting to get a little bit skeptical about the celebration that we got all of the other NATO members up to a certain percentage of defense spending. Defense spending is incredibly wasteful spending. I mean, we're at 900 billion or almost $1 trillion in the United States, and if we were ever going to save any money, I'm sure we could save a ton there. So I think the conventional wisdom has said, oh, this will make the world safer. I still would like to. I still would like to have greater comfort that we had a vision of dealing with the kinds of wars that we're seeing with drones, with the miniaturization. So it's these industrial complexes still need to be monitored, and that includes the foreign policy and the development and the humanitarian as well. But they do grow up and they take on an energy of their own that's worrisome. And the Europeans falling into step with us is not. So Karin's view that they should they should take an initiative and have a sense of purpose of their own, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
Brian, can I just add a little
Absolutely. Yeah.
codicil, I think, to what Rick just said. 100% agree. I've always hated the focus on 3%, 5%, whether it's development or military spending. I think Rick and I were able to prove in our little teeny bureau that you could actually do a lot with very little money. And there's tons and tons of waste. And when you only focus on a percentage, you don't really worry about what you're trying to do. You just try to meet your percentage and you try to shove money out the door very quickly.
Thank you.
Sudi,
Sudi.
could I give an example of that?
Sure.
I had a conversation with the USAID mission director in Afghanistan early on, and maybe 2007 or so. And his greatest concern, we had created a product in our think tank that was measuring progress, where we actually doing something that was helping Afghanistan. But when he got on the phone, his greatest concern was that he had $1.5 billion to spend that year. How is he going to spend it? Now, I could tell him I wasn't that worried about it, but I thought we could have used a lot more. For example, there was a local initiatives project that was underfunded that would have been great. But anyway, that kind of that's the way a lot of people think about these things, and that is an insult to the people of the country and the taxpayers.
Thanks. We're talking about a lot of problems currently that we're facing and in the past. I want to turn to Sudi because she's posed really a question about moving ahead. So Sudi, could you unmute and join us, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here. This is such an important discussion. And, as someone who is originally from Iran, has always kind of felt multinational, and has family from all over the world. You know, I think one of the things I struggle with, and I'm an attorney by trade, so one of the things I've really struggled with is what happens, how do we recover from this? How do we start the process of recovering from this? How much have we become more internationally vulnerable? Even if we do manage to get some sense of control back of this country and of due process, and what guidance would you all give in your wisdom to all of us who are watching things happen and feel absolutely helpless and also are awaiting something coming next to our communities?
Well, I was lucky enough to be one of Obama's ambassadors to the UN in New York, and our global popularity probably picked up 20 points from the just as a result of the election and Obama and what he represented. And it was, I think, a time of great hopefulness. I think where we underperformed and where what we need to be ready with is that we really had to bring new and fresh ideas. And there was a little bit of a tendency to think that the change of personalities and the goodwill of Obama versus George W. Bush would be enough. And I think we underperformed, and I think we underserved Obama as well. I still feel that on Syria, for example, that the red line that when he decided not to use military force, but said, I really want to bring the Congress along. I felt that was the right move. Now, we didn't do the hard work to make it happen, and the Congress, of course, weaseled out of really taking responsibility. But I thought at that moment Obama deserved really good, fresh ideas, creativity, and I suffer from some of the same pain that Karin suffers from when I've seen a couple elements of creativity in the Trump administration, which I've been envious of. And I don't ever want to be in that position. So I think the foreign policy establishment has got to call upon the American people much, much more. We've got to make the responsibility directly tied to the support of the American people, and that includes the countries that we're going into. That includes whether we think there's something we could do in these places, and then we have to deliver success. I mean, you can't just keep having an overnight military success and then insecurity for the next 5 years. I mean, that just doesn't. That's not so. Anyway, that's a partial answer, but it's a really big question, and thank you.
Uh, I'd like to call on Amir Rahimi, who lives in the UK, who's a refugee from Afghanistan, to talk about the impact in his life and on the people of U.S. force there over the many years that U.S. was involved there. Amir, are you on?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Mir, and I am originally from Afghanistan, and I've been in the UK since 2001. So that's a long time ago. I think the question is that since 2001, the US and NATO intervention in Afghanistan, and then after 20 years of war and to some extent state building, the US handed the country back from the Taliban to the Taliban, leaving behind a number of groups quite vulnerable, minorities, and particularly women and girls. And my question is that, from your perspective, what could have been done that we wouldn't end up at this stage, or at this particular moment where women and girls cannot access education or work, and they are, quite at risk in terms of security-wise, and what can be done now in terms of at least alleviating those risks, particularly to women and girls? Thank you.
Do you want me to start? I've got
Yes,
a
please.
few. Mira, that's an excellent question. And I mean, we can, without rehashing all the mistakes that were made in Afghanistan over the years, including the horrific withdrawal. And I do believe that a small military presence could have kept the lid on it, but those decisions were taken. I do think we need to be, and this is probably a positive thing about Trump, I do think we need to be much more creative in how we think about these challenges. Now, I was at an event recently, and someone asked me about Afghanistan, and I said, "Why don't we just evacuate all the women and girls out of the country?" It was sort of a throwaway remark, but I just feel like we need to think in a very different way than what we've done. And of course, after the event, four or five people came up and said, "How do we sign up?" But there's that. But then also, I would like more people out on the streets about Afghanistan. Like, okay, we saw what happened about Gaza. Why are we not having a similar outcry about what's going on in Afghanistan? I mean, girls can't even sit next to a window now. Why are people not marching? And why aren't, and I do think maybe the diaspora can help organize those kinds of things, because I do think we need to put a lot more pressure. And often the street can be very helpful to put pressure. I mean, just here in London, as you probably see near the Iranian embassy near Hyde Park, every single day there's screaming and shouting and people holding flags and things. So I do think we just need to think much more creatively outside the box, and I'm sure Rick will have some good ideas about that too.
Well, I'm really not loaded. I'm really not prepared. Even though most of our programs over the years have focused on women and girls, because if you see every conflict country we went into, women and youth were generally underrepresented. I mean, they had not caused the conflict situation. So if you want change, you've got to go to people who probably didn't have the original ownership. I don't know quite how we reach into the country right now, because we really don't have much of a relationship. And there's some international presence. I mean, there's some UN presence in Afghanistan, but it's really hard to figure out how to do a people first program with this kind of regime in place. So I'd like to come back to that. I'm sorry, I'm not, but just the quick answer to two of the other points you made. I don't believe that the U.S. or any democracy should spend 20 years in another country. I mean, that's essentially an occupation, and it just undermines both countries. And then the second thing I would say is that we tend to go to a highly centralized system. We think that if we have a good government in Kabul, that everything will work, and that's just, we really have to move way beyond. So something like the National Solidarity Program in Afghanistan had terrific promise, but it was nowhere near as fully executed or as fully, that was what I was referring to earlier, as it could have been. And so I think there were opportunities to really engage. We kept saying there were about 28 or 30 million people in Afghanistan. Every time I spoke to a family, the feeling that the census, which had been taken during the Russian occupation, had actually was way off, and we were in a country of much more like 45 million people. Well, that's a very different place. So those kinds of basic misunderstandings lead to the inevitable complications that Karin referred to.
Thank you. Michael Lockett made an interesting point, and the question that emerges from that, I'd like him to address that to our discussion leaders. Michael, can you unmute yourself? Okay. He may have stepped away for a second. Tom Flint is going to join us with an excellent question about exceptionalism. Tom?
Could I make one more point quickly,
Sure,
Brian?
of course.
Just in terms of the demonstrations that Karin had talked about, I just received today a notice saying that the next No Kings rally in the United States is going to be March 28th, and I think we need to have over 20 million people in the streets. If we had 7 million last time, and just and yes, the expression of individual issues is important, but the broader issue of the erratic behavior, the erratic leadership in our country is I think primary.
Yeah, we've seen how what happened in Minnesota forced the administration to change course. Excellent point. Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, thank you for spotlighting my comment. I certainly wasn't expecting to be put on the spot here. So I'll essentially just read kind of what I put in the chat here for folks that are helping to lead the discussion. Would you agree that the real root of the problem is for American interventionism is our willingness to believe in American exceptionalism? In other words, we have so often been of the mindset that we're somehow different from others. We're America,
Mhm.
right? And I personally feel like this is a huge problem that needs to be addressed, like as a root cause in education. So, what do you all feel about that?
Can I start on that one? Because I over here, it's a great point, Tom, right? So it's your first time, Tom. I think
Yes.
it's excellent. And what I often hear over here, and it drives me crazy, is when I'm listening to the US news and I hear an American senator or congressperson saying, our democracy, the envy of the world. And it's like, no, it isn't. And people got to get over that. But I think when you're inside this US bubble, you think, oh, everybody wants to come to America. But they don't anymore. I mean, of course, you're still going to have certain people that are trying to get in, but it isn't the same anymore. And I don't think a lot of Americans understand how they're being viewed now, especially with this second Trump administration. It's really changed things. But can I also just, because I know we only have a few minutes, and I really want to touch on something that's important to both me and Rick. And Rick was really instrumental in helping me think through this. And he did raise it already. It's about putting locals first. And how do you do that? And how do you do it in a way that you're catalytic, that you're behind the scenes, so you're helpful, but you're not in their face. Now, the one example I wanted to mention was what on the counter ISIL. This is just on the military side of the counter ISIL strategy. I worked on that when I was in the State Department. And the tagline that the Brits and the Americans and the other soldiers said was by, with, through, and for. So by local actors, with local actors, through local actors, and for local actors. We played a very behind the scenes role. We maybe, they had the iPads and we would do the bombing, but they would do the targeting. But they did the fighting and they did all the work themselves. And we were the coaches and we gave them confidence and we gave them expertise, but it was all them that did it. So they won their countries back. They won in Iraq and in Syria back. And it's just such a critical thing. Now, that was just for the military, but I do think that approach, and that's something Rick has been pushing for a very long time. So I just wanted to raise that because I know we're running out of time, Brian. I hope you don't mind.
Fine. You,
I was on a national smart power commission in 2007, and I went around and talked to about 235 people in four early major U.S. political states: New Hampshire, Minnesota, Iowa, and South Carolina. And my first question to everybody was, anybody I met with, police chief in Iowa City, how do you think America is seen in the world today? The one word that came up in 90% of the responses was arrogant. So the fine line between having something very special and worthy of being cherished and arrogance is it's an extremely fine line. And we've seen it within families. We've seen it within, I went to Harvard College. They tell you all the time how special you are. Well, only if you produce, not if you just show up at tailgates. So, it's it's kind of actually a very funny line from one of the Boston political guys when I went down to get advice when I ran for office in 1976. He said, "I've seen a lot of guys who went like you who went to Harvard." That was a very refreshing. So exceptionalism is an invitation to arrogance, and it's got to be carefully watched. And it's or pride goeth before the fall, whatever you want to say. I mean, all those cliches have a reason for being there.
thanks, Rick. Before we conclude here, because we're coming to the end, I want to acknowledge that participating today is a good friend of Global Citizen Circle, Miriam from Afghanistan, who's not going to comment, but we want her to know that she is in our thoughts and we're supporting her through the difficulties of living through some very tough times in Afghanistan. So thank you all before I turn it over to Theo, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we're unable to get to so many great questions and comments that people have shared with us in the chat. I think what we're taking away is that we are in a time of deflection as well. Somebody did mention the Epstein files and how all this military action is taken away. So deflection is a word that applies, but an inflection point where we see not only repeated uses of American power, an inflection point in that way, but one without seemingly a lot of guidance or logic or pattern or thoughtfulness. And that may be that obviously adds to the danger and perhaps even the immorality of the action that we've seen take place and the threats of action. And I think we all can agree that, as Rick said, that 7 million isn't enough, 10 million isn't enough, 20 million will maybe get us to the mark where we're really making a statement that might no longer should be making right, but right should be making might. So thank you for enduring my somewhat skillless attempts at moderating here. The technical challenges are enormous for a baby boomer. But I want to turn it over to Theo now to close this out. And please feel free to stay on for further discussion after the official end of the forum here. And thanks again for your excellent participation, Rick and Karin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Theo.
You're muted, Theo.
Sorry. I should know better. First, Brian, you did a great job. There's always technical difficulties in this kind of thing, and we always give everybody grace for those kinds of things, like you all did when I had to unmute myself, right? Rick and Karin, really wonderful to have you both with us today. I knew when we met earlier this week to kind of prep for this, I knew this was going to be a remarkable circle and discussion, and so many people joined in the conversation, which is what we're always looking for to happen at circles, because this is a conversation that everybody has a right to be a part of. I want to take, before people leave today, and you can stay on, as Brian said, we encourage people to stay on after if you just want to engage in a little more conversation informally. You're welcome to. But before folks leave today, I'd like to take a moment to ask you to consider signing on to our declaration, a GCC Global Citizen Circle Declaration of Moral Power. I think Phoebe, are you putting this in the chat? If not, she will be. And it also lives on our website blog. And you can read through the whole declaration, but what we are asking people to pledge to is to act in accordance with conscience, even when doing so carries personal cost. Refuse silence, compliance, or benefit in the face of injustice. Defend the dignity and rights of all people without exception. Speak truth, practice care, and choose courage over convenience. Align daily actions with the world I wish to help bring into being. So you can sign on to this pledge. We appreciate it if you would, if you believe these things to be true. And again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for spending the time with us. We will have another online circle at the beginning of March, and it will have to do with AI for good. So stay tuned for that one. And again, don't let these conversations end here. We hope you'll continue to talk with others about the issues you heard about today. And again, please stay on with us. We often have really rich discussions after the formal part of the program has ended. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Theo.
Great. And I know people, we're right at the hour. I know folks have to sign off for work and things like that. But for those of you who'd like to stay, we're here. So please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Theo, and thank you, Brian. It was really, really a pleasure to be part of it, and great to see Jerry and Nadine there as well on my screen. Jerry is everybody's favorite human being, so it's thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick.
Anybody have dying to say anything, or comment? Eleanor, I can see you're trying to say something, but you have to unmute. No, you aren't? No,
I just wanted to agree that
big echoes. Let me mute myself.
my old echo. Am I echoing?
Sorry, Eleanor, you're too much of an echo. So I'll mute you.
Theo, I have a question. Catherine Shannon.
Hey, Catherine, how
Hey,
are you?
Catherine.
Okie doke, thanks. Wonderful discussion. Thank you, Ambassador, and your colleague. The one question I have in terms of moving forward and ensuring that our foreign policy reflects morality instead of what is going on now is how do you see all these problems that we're facing being related to the concentration of wealth uh, in the hands of very few people in the United States, the big tech brothers, the military industrial complex, and so forth? How do we, because I think that's very much related to many of these mistakes that have been made. And I think I recall somebody suggesting that it's great that the Europeans will increase their spending on military equipment because that's going to mean more dollars for American manufacturers of military equipment. So concentration of wealth there and in the media, and the huge inequality in wealth that has happened in America in the last 20 years.
I mean, do you want me to take a shot at it, or Brian?
Sure.
You want to take a shot?
Yeah,
I think the division of wealth is one of our great national challenges. It has been the concentration in that 50% of the wealth or 60% of it is in 1% of the population is incredibly unhealthy. I think it's matched by the fact that a Federal Reserve study of a couple of years ago said that almost 50% of American households are within a $800 disaster of being broke. So if their car breaks down, they are in a big, 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 big problem. They have a health issue, whatever. So that's our domestic challenge. Our division with the world, obviously, there are some countries that are growing, whose economies are growing much faster than ours. And so that's narrowing the gap between countries that have great wealth. But within those countries, they're replicating our divisions of wealth as well. So they're getting up with very few people that dominate everything. I'm not, probably in terms of enlightened billionaires in this country versus exploitive billionaires, we'll probably have a pretty good balance. So it's not by itself a problem, but clearly our tax codes and a lot of other things need attention. So it does weaken us. It does make us less democratic. And I'm a great believer, particularly in stuff like foreign policy that has been dominated for way too long by way too few way too smart people, and and as a result, they're always telling us that they're taking care of it for us, and that's not the way democracies really work very well. So we have a lot of work to do. In my own experience, when I would go out to the local Democratic committees in Maine and I'd talk about Haiti, I would find that they'd be much more interested in what I had to say about Haiti if I just come back than anybody ever would have expected. So these are fascinating stories. There's a chance to actually help out to do good. All those things, we need to exploit those things in our politics and make foreign policy much, much more accessible. So, Catherine, it's a good question. I don't have a definitive answer, but that's my take on it.
No, Catherine, thanks for joining us. The military-industrial complex, without a question, has had enormous impact. They are much of our Congress are wholly owned subsidiaries of military contractors who have enormous influence in their districts through the very strategic spreading out of factories producing ammunitions, guidance systems, bombers, helicopters, you name it. Here in New England, from the submarine General Dynamics in Connecticut and Raytheon missiles and Iron Dome protection systems here in Massachusetts. They have an enormous and outside influence, and they help convince members of Congress not to raise taxes to pay for all of this. And when so that it seems like we're getting something for nothing, but just saddling future generations with an enormous debt. And we're going to be paying $1 trillion a year just in interest on the debt. I mean, I'm not the most radical deficit hawk, but it's gone too far. So you put your finger right on one of the structural problems in American politics and American polity by identifying that. And obviously, it was something General Eisenhower was very concerned about when he left office and warned about it. And his dire predictions have come true. There's no question in my mind that we wouldn't be indulging this hugely expensive adventurism abroad without the power of those corporations.
One addition to that is that our manufacturing base, which many people worry about, this is one of our most competitive manufacturing sectors. So when President Trump makes a deal with the Saudis to sell several $100 billion worth of weapons, it's essentially it's one of the few domestic jobs programs that we have. So that imbalance that Brian mentioned, your answer, Brian, was really excellent. Thanks.
James, I see our board chair, James McKim, has been waiting with his hand raised there. James, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Phoebe. Theo, can you all hear me? I'm in
We
the car.
can.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for this great discussion and opportunity for folks to ask some questions of the experts. One of the things that I don't think I heard, and I had to pop out for about 2 minutes, but I don't think I heard any discussion about how the situation in Venezuela impacts or what it says about the power of, or what the BRIC countries might do, and taking maybe a lead from this aggressive stance that we've taken.
Rick, do you have any answer to that?
Maybe Brian, you could take that.
Yeah, well, I think the lesson from Venezuela so far is the impotence of the BRICS country to respond. I mean, with a single special forces strike, we have set the country of Venezuela, as it seems now, on a much different course that fractures and maybe ends with some permanence their relationship with certainly Russia, and I don't think Brazil is going anywhere, but they have not responded in a way that makes it seem that Venezuela is going to continue that relationship in any vigorous manner. I mean, the basically turning over the direction of oil development to U.S. requests is the best symbol and signal of that. And I've got to say, I was very surprised by how quickly Delcy Rodriguez fell in line, or at least she has seemed to so far. I mean, I had many meetings with Delcy Rodriguez, and she is a Cuban true believer in a highly ideological administration. I met her when Hugo Chavez was in office, and I guess when the contemplation of a hanging focuses your attention, and the incredible military potential of the United States and what they're able to do, and they know where everyone is, they know where you live, they know where you're going. That has kept that regime in line, and I think it's probably going to continue to do so. But
hey, Brian, I totally agree with what you're saying about Venezuela. I did a quick AI search before this call. 56 armed conflicts involving 92 countries right now. And if you go to drug wars and insurgencies and civil wars, they take the number up to 130. But these BRICS countries, everybody's involved. I mean, if you look at, I'm a huge fan of what Prime Minister Carney offered in Canada this last week, but the intermediate countries are not behaving all that well in a lot of other places. And if you look at the wars in Libya with Turkey and
Somalia,
Egypt, and you go to Sudan, and you go the UAE and the Saudis, and so a lot of people showing up in and obviously the Chinese and the Russians are not doing that well with, if you go to Myanmar and Ukraine is I mean, I can't believe the losses that the Russians have taken, and they continue. So the BRICS, these new coalitions, and taking responsibility as opposed to saying that you've got an agreement. There's a lot of work to be done, and I was never that impressed at the UN by the Group of 77, which had gotten up to about 130 countries. They'd found it a pretty effective way to obstruct, but they hadn't really found it a particularly useful way to actually advance things. And if I have a concern about democracy right now, is that it's too much of a debating society and we're not producing enough results.
For those who don't know, tell us about the Group of 77. Those are the non-aligned countries.
Well, I mean, again, it's just about everybody at the UN, but they do certain things really much smarter than we do. So they'll send a single country to represent a negotiation for 130 countries, and they can do, whereas the United States feels it has to be at every single negotiation, and then we triplicate the Finnish effort or what our other allies, so we could be there in force and stop. Many of these agreements are consensus agreements, so they can block almost any consensus by just having one country there speaking for what they say they're 130. So anyway, I think we need a more constructive agenda that tells this is how we're going to get back to those values, and also a celebration of the 80 years of peace that we've had. It's been the last 80 years, for all the blunders that we've made, has been a period of earthly relative peace compared to the 100 million people that died in the 20th century. So I think we've got to assert that vision more aggressively. And by the way, even having people able to use the word peace, this really kills me. A friend of mine was the president of the USIP for a few years. She went up, the United States Institute of Peace, she went up to Capitol Hill to lobby for it. She met with several Republican congressmen, and a couple of them said to her, I like what you're doing, but there's one word in your name I don't like. It wasn't United States or Institute. It was the word peace. Now, because the title of my book is Peace Works, I ask every audience, how many people prefer the word war or conflict or bloody to the word peace? I've yet to have a single person raise their hand saying they prefer, and I did that with 2,000 model UN students in New Haven last week. From 35 countries, not a single person raised their hand to say they prefer the word war, conflict, or bloody to peace. But the word peace is still seen as some kind of movement out of the 1960s in the United States that was not worthy of our heritage. If we can change that around, and the Duffys really worked on that. I mean, they were the big time champions.
Rick, thank you. Thank you. And I don't want to keep people longer than, it's getting to be well past the hour. And I know, Rick, thank you so much for being here. And Brian, you've offered so much of your time. And I want to end on that note that we all start using, if we haven't already, the word peace more often. It's important. It's important, right?
Theo,
Yeah.
because of my microphone problem before, could I close us out with
Please. I'd love you to.
our pastor of the world, Archbishop Tutu, who has been a part of our lives for more than 50 years. And what he has said, we're hearing a song now, Hold On. And I think he gives us the best reason to hold on. He said to a group of people from all over the world, small groups from all over the world, he said, I'm just trying to word it for this, that it was the countless little gatherings, little cells all over the world, each seemingly insignificant in itself, that together overcame the pernicious wave of apartheid. And I believe that if he, with all that he saw, from the degradation of human beings to the absolute best in human beings, if he could say that to us, that we have real reason to hold on. And it's people like gathered here today that make me feel very optimistic, even if it's worried optimism. Thank you so much. And yes, my brother Jerry is the most favorite person of everyone in the world, our world. Jerry.
You're muted, Jerry. I'm gonna hang on. You're muted. Maybe Jerry doesn't know how to
Gonna give my
unmute.
brother the last word.
Yeah. I don't think he can unmute Eleanor.
We know. He doesn't have to speak.
Okay.
He
There we
types
go.
in
There we
caps.
go.
All I'd say is when they were talking about the needs in different countries, I was thinking back to Sarge Shriver and the Peace Corps. I mean, isn't that what the Peace Corps was all about? The good stuff that we did back then. And so good to see Brian of the Bay State Banner 40 years ago. How this Irish white guy could run the black newspaper in Boston, I don't know, but I got to know him.
Yeah, I'm still
And
asking the same
I
question.
still say,
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah. Jerry's dressed in his usual attire.
Yeah.
Right.
I have six of them though.
Okay. Great to
Thanks,
see you, Jerry.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Rick. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
I will end this now.